What was the Boston Stamp Act about? Well, on March 22nd, 1765, the Boston Stamp Act was originally passed by the British Parliament, where they imposed a tax upon all American colonists. The tax affected every piece of paper, such as documents, licenses, newspapers, playing cards, and many other publications that included the printing of paper. The tax was a way of gathering funds that was meant to pay for soldiers or the American frontier. Hence, this tax angered many colonists because there was a difference between taxing them for revenue and taxing them for regulation of trading. American colonists felt angry because they were taxed but not represented. This began the riots that were to come. The 13 colonies formed an organization called the Sons of Liberty. The purpose of this organization was to protect the rights of colonists and to fight against the tax imposed onto them. Here is a clip to clarify things you may have not catched in this.
So intellectual historians might put the roots of the American Revolution earlier, but I'm going to start with the end of the 7 Years' War in 1763, which, as you will recall from last week, was 1, expensive, and 2, a victory for the British, including British subjects living in America who now had more land and therefore more money. Right, so in 1765, the British government was like, hey, since we went into this debt to get you all this new land, we trust that you won't mind if we pass the Stamp Act, in which we place a fancy stamp on your documents, newspapers, playing cards, etc., and in return, you give us money. Well, it turns out the colonists weren't so keen on this, not so much because the tax was high, but because they had no direct representation in the parliament that had levied the tax. And plus, they were cranky about the crown keeping large numbers of British troops in the colonies even after the end of the 7 Years' War. And then the British government was like, you are inadequately grateful, and the colonists were like, shut up, we hate you, and the British government was like, as long as you live under our roof, you live by our rules, and so on. But eventually, the British backed down and repealed the Stamp Act. The repeal inspired a line of commemorative teapots, thereby beginning America's storied tradition of worthless collectible ceramics. But in the end, this only emboldened the colonists when the British tried to put new taxes on the Americans in the form of the Townshend Act. These led to further protests and boycotts, and most importantly, more organization among the colonists. The protests escalated. 1770 saw the Boston Massacre, which with its sum total of 5 dead was perhaps the least massacre of all time. And in 1773, a bunch of colonists dumped about $1 million worth of tea into Boston Harbor in protest of British government decisions that actually would have made British tea cheaper. So the Boston Tea Party led to further British crackdowns, and then mobilization of colonial militias, and then Paul Revere, and then actual war. But you can hear all about that stuff on like TV miniseries.
In July, Andrew Oliver, the Boston Stamp Act distributor, just recently began building a brick house that suggests to most people that it was his stamp office. On August 14, a group of opposers to the Stamp Act, the Son of Liberty, paraded through Boston Street with a sculpture of Andrew Oliver. They had beheaded the head of his sculpture and even invaded his home later on. Even though Andrew Oliver's newly built building was made of stone, it was still torn down apart within hours by the Son of Liberty. Because of such an attack on his building, Andrew Oliver soon resigned as distributor to avoid such incident ever again.
A few days later, mobs were gathered again and sacked the house of Thomas Hutchinson. On August 20th, 2 mobs were formed. One attacked the house of William Story, wrecked it, and stole valuable papers. The second mob attacked Benjamin Howell's home and stole official papers. They wanted to get rid of the source that was disturbing the tax and do it in a violent manner where people would understand the consequences if they did not get rid of the Stamp Act. The significance of that was to show the British government that the abuse of power and tyranny was not to be tolerated. Many custom officers were scared of the mobs and eventually quit their jobs. Parliament repealed the Stamp Act on March 1776, which discontinued it. However, Parliament also passed the Declaratory Act, that said the Parliament had supreme power over the colonists to show that they were the ones still in charge.